Hello students, I am Madhvi and today we will be walking through Unit 10 of Indian Consumer Market. The structure of today's session will follow from introduction. We will also be looking at the meaning, the nature and scope of Indian consumer market. We will also be talking in terms of the characteristics and how India has panned out in terms of globalization. So, let us first understand in terms of the introduction. So, market as we know is dominated by both rural and urban consumers. So, what is very important for us to understand is that the role of Indian consumers both from urban and rural areas has been growing exponentially over the years, and of late we have also seen that the rural consumers are almost overtaking the urban consumers both in terms of spend and in terms of the volume and type of purchase. We will deep dive further into this in a while. The types of consumer markets is also important for us to understand, whether it is in terms of food and beverages, retail, consumer products or even transportation. So, when we talk in terms of consumer markets, we need to understand that it is very different from business markets. Business markets exponentially cover what is being sold in the market, whether it is in terms of a large chunk of items or bulk items that are being sold to companies or firms directly. Whereas, in the case of consumer markets, we are focusing on individual consumers or purchases made for a family or for limited usage. So, market depends largely on the consumer type. The type of firms which operate in the consumer market are different from that of the industrial or business market. So, a market is characterized by certain features. So, what are they? Particularly when you are talking in terms of the individual consumers or personal consumption, we are talking in the first go about demographic features. So, what are these demographic features? The demographic characteristics are like age, gender, education, etc. Whereas, when you are talking of psychographic characteristics, we are talking of activities, interests, behavior, their learnings, perceptions and so on. Whereas, in the case of behavior characteristics or demographics, we are talking in terms of brand loyalty, consumer status in the market, where they are in their purchase cycle and factors of that nature. And finally, we will also be talking in terms of geographic characteristics. This is the location. We were just talking in terms of rural and urban markets. So, rural markets or urban markets, market size, market density, that is how much of population is present in a particular area is very important for us to understand as a business. So, if a company is selling say pens, now the type of pens they sell and the quantity of pens they sell to a consumer vis-a-vis a business will be very different. In the same way, the type of pens that they sell from an urban to a rural market will also be changing to a smaller extent. However, of late we have seen a trend where there is a lot of aspiration in the rural areas as well, and they are quickly catching up with the purchase type of urban areas. So, in the Indian consumer market, whenever we talk in terms of segmentation, that is dividing the markets largely based on a certain homogeneous factor, we divide them into urban markets and rural markets. So, the Indian consumer market we know consists of a large number of consumers both from affluent and non-affluent status. They may be economically at a disadvantaged stage. However, the kind of spending that we have seen over the years has increased exponentially, and within this year, that is 2025, we expect the market to grow to double what it was earlier. So, that is what is very important from a company's perspective. Now, the brand loyalty of consumers also plays a very critical role in terms of what kind of purchases are made from whom and to what extent. So, if we see in terms of how the consumer market is spanning, we see that there is a 6.7% growth in the Indian consumption market just between 2015 and 2020. And if we see between 2021 and 2025, it has grown to 7.1%. That means year on year, we are seeing a huge jump not only in consumption, but also in terms of the spend of our consumers. And very soon, India is expected to be the world's third largest consumer market. So, that is a very important criteria from a business perspective. So, in terms of marketing focus, what we need to understand is if we are particularly looking at FMCG or fast moving consumer goods, consumer tastes, preferences, purchase behavior are paramount for a company. In addition to that, they also need to understand in terms of the rising affluence of the people in the country. And we are also talking in terms of not only rural areas, but urban areas as well. There is also a large trend towards urbanization. While larger metros have grown a lot, we are also seeing a humongous number of smaller cities which have been growing largely over the years, and they have become a significant market for firms. So, here we also see a certain pattern of purchase. We will try to cover this in more detail at a later stage. So, rural markets, as we were discussing a while ago, are showing certain trends. One is in terms of purchase parity with the urban areas. Second is in terms of aspirational goals, purchasing the same products that are being purchased in urban areas. For example, earlier there was a trend where shampoo bottles were being sold more in urban areas and shampoo sachets were being sold in rural areas, because in rural areas they were not willing to spend so much on shampoo bottles or the bigger or larger packs. However, this has over the years merged, and today it is almost similar in terms of the kind of purchases being made in the urban and rural areas. And not only from the consumers business point of view, from within the country or domestic market, we also need to understand how internationally the countries are seeing India as a very fertile ground for consumer growth and consumer potential. As there is a large globalization that is taking place, it started in 1990s, but now with the LPG that happened at that point in time, the liberalization, privatization and globalization which opened up Indian markets, but of late with factors like online sales, internet, web services, lot of travel that is happening between countries, we see that there is a lot of change that is happening. And we also see that while Indian domestic market is filled with a lot of competitors who have grown in the home ground, there is a predisposition to foreign brands, and this is visible throughout the country. So, let us just also understand in terms of what is a marketplace. So, a marketplace is a distinct group of potential companies, customers that a company could target with its products and services. So, when we are talking about a distinct group of potential customers, here what we are trying to understand is the homogeneity of the group. For example, when we are talking in terms of urban groups or urban areas, we can further homogenize in terms of smaller segments. For example, if you are talking in terms of soft drinks in the summer, the kind of ground or the kind of market that we are looking at would be mostly the youthful sector who would invest a lot more into soft drinks. However, if you are looking at health drinks being sold in summer, we will find that it consists of consumers who are largely into health, fitness and lifestyle changes. So, the group is the same in terms of the marketplace, that is the urban market, but the smaller pockets which we call homogeneity is what we need to understand from a firm's point of view. So, who decides on the purchases? As far as a consumer is concerned, they are the ones who decide not only in terms of how much they want to spend, but also in terms of where they want to spend, on which product they want to spend their money, and also understand in terms of any brand loyalty or brand consciousness. Today, we find that a lot of youngsters are predisposed towards foreign brands, whether it is H&M or many other companies that are existing in the market, or we see a big trend towards iPhones. You want to hold an iPhone in your hand because you feel that it will give you a certain status in the society. So, because of lifestyle changes, all these factors and many more factor in terms of what a consumer is looking at. So, business needs to understand all these factors. In terms of the nature of business of the Indian consumer market, we need to understand there are many categories. What are these categories? For example, consumable goods, soft home goods, durable goods, food and beverages, services. Now, if we talk in terms of services, we see a plethora of them of late. For example, you may be taking a ride share like Uber and Ola or Rapido. So, this is a part of the services being offered. They are aggregators who are offering ride share for people who do not want to travel in their own transportation for whatever reasons. Or we can see in terms of hotels, a lot of aggregators like Trivago, which offer subsidized prices because they are able to pull out data from multiple websites and give a choice to consumers in terms of which hotel they can choose based on the cost, the type of comforts they want, the amenities, etc. So, part of the services. If we talk in terms of soft home goods, it could be furnishings, furnitures, there could be many other items. Consumable goods, we primarily talk in terms of say soaps, toothpaste, shampoos and so on. Durable goods, for example, washing machine or a dishwasher, or even today we have a lot of cleaning robots which clean and mop the floors. So, a number of them are a part of the retail business. Now, let us understand in terms of the scope of the business. The Indian company consumer market is expected to grow between 6% and 7% up until 2025, that is this year. However, what we need to understand that it is a market size of 4 trillion US dollars. That is the kind of business that is expected in terms of the Indian consumer spending. So, we also need to understand that there are top 2 tier spending groups, and what are they? They are the affiliate consumers. So, their collective spending is projected to actually reach 40% by 2025. What this essentially means is that just 2 tiers of the groups from the top are going to spend 40% of this 4 trillion US dollars in this year and in the future too. So, that means a sizable chunk of market is present within just 2 tier groups. Now, consumer expenditure is expected to grow with 12% CAGR, that is the cumulative growth over the next few years to become the world's 3rd largest market, consumer market. So, that means there is a huge potential that companies are trying to capitalize on. So, food products, if we notice, they are a leading segment, and how much is their contribution? We see 43% of the overall market is coming just from the food sector. That means it could be as simple as a packet of chips, to soft drinks, to any other ready-made food items that we are finding a lot in the market, to perishable and non-perishable food items. It could be the entire range. So, but there is a huge chunk, that of 43% being covered by just the food market. So, another thing that we need to understand is that India has a large consumer spending as well. If you see over the years, earlier there was a big share of the market which would actually save. The focus was on saving in different manner. But now we see there is a focus on spending, consumption. So, the shift that has happened over the years, or I would say over the decades, is very, very significant from a business point of view. So, Indian retail industry is also another area which has grown largely over the years. And in terms of financial year 2017, we saw that it covered about 7% of the total sector of the business. However, today 65% of consumer durable markets, we understand, comes from urban markets. So, that means there is a trend of 35% purchases of durable items in the rural markets as well. However, if we were to see this, say a decade or so ago, the trend would have been something like 80:20. So, 80% from urban markets and 20% from rural markets for durable items. Things have changed a lot over the years. And this, we need to understand, is not with the maximum penetration that is happening. It is with the minimum penetration. That means that there is a large potential of untapped market in the Indian scenario. So, that is where a lot of players, whether Indian or international, are stepping into various verticals, whether it is food and retail, or it is clothing, so or apparel, to capitalize on all these market potential. So, we will also be trying to understand that when we talk in terms of market today, it is no more in terms of a brick and mortar market. It is also an online market which has grown to a large extent. Nobody expected. You take companies like Amazon and Flipkart, which are now the leaders in terms of the online market. However, we find companies like Zepto, which has grown so much in just a short period of time, with its just 10-minute kind of delivery. If we looked at Amazon when it was trying to offer 24-hour delivery service in India, everybody was a little skeptical. How is it possible? Then in terms of food, we saw Amazon offering say within a few hours we would deliver. But today Zepto talks in terms of 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Think of McDonald's. McDonald's was focusing on saying that we will deliver food in 30 minutes or money back, and nobody believed that it is possible. They actually pulled it back a little when they came into the Indian market. But today Zepto Food also has an offer where they are able to service consumers very, very quickly. So, Domino's is not the only player, there are so many players. You are talking in terms of Swiggy, another aggregator who is able to collect food from various vendors or hotels and supply it to consumers at a very quick time frame. So, hundreds of ethnic groups are also there when we talk in terms of demographic characteristics. It is not only in terms of the languages that are there, in terms of the age group, but ethnic groups. So, in terms of the age group, the median age group of the company, that is the average age group of the country, is 24 years. However, in terms of ethnic groups, there are hundreds of them, and they are dominated, say, by Indo-Aryans, by Dravidians, or many other ethnic groups which are all over the country, and they play a very important role. But we also need to understand there are hundreds of languages and there are hundreds of dialects that are accepted in our country, and that provides a further challenge to businesses. There are also religious sentiments and religious orders that need to be considered in terms of business potential. Now, talking in terms of demographic characteristics, we also need to understand that small things, like for example, the type of oil that is being used. In different pockets of the country, we will find certain people prefer to use mustard oil, while others use groundnut oil and some others use coconut oil. So, there is a big difference in just a small matter of oil and the cooking medium that is being used. So, this is an important consideration, and all these demographic characteristics provide a big challenge to marketers, because they need to understand the ethos of every small niche market before they are able to float their products in the market. So, whether it is in terms of the 4 P's, that is the marketing mix, the product, price, place and promotion. So, also we need to understand that there is a new generation which has come up. One is the millennials, which are about 440 million millennials in the country, and Goldman Sachs has come out with a report which states that there are 390 million Gen Z youth in the country. So, that means there is not just a matter of a median age of 24 years that we were talking about, but within the entire market there is a big characteristic difference between people of different ages and the kind of purchase behavior they exhibit, which provides a lot of challenge. So, there is also a growth demographics that is happening. That means that again, while we are having certain understanding in terms of the market, in terms of the demographic features like age, income, gender, location, etc., we also understand that they are becoming smaller and smaller pockets as well. So, in terms of psychographic characteristics, we need to understand in terms of interests, activities, opinions, values. All these are factors which need to be considered. There are also behavior characteristics. What are they? For example, in terms of brand loyalty, usage rates, user status, or how long they have been associated with a particular brand. Now, geographic characteristics, as we said, it depends on the market segmentation. Now, I can broadly divide urban and rural areas and further subdivide into tier A, tier B, tier C, tier D kind of cities, and go for metros and then rural areas, semi-urban areas. So, there are a lot of changes that are happening. We also see in terms of the consumption pattern of Indian consumer market. So, if you see the graph, you will be able to understand that India is a big growth story. So, here we also see the income distribution in India that is happening in terms of both urbanization and the rural urbanization that is happening. So, 40% of India's population will be living in urban areas by 2025, and this means that there is a rising affluence, there is expenditure that is happening in various verticals, and we also need to understand that the city purchases that are happening is also growing exponentially. There is also another concept that we need to understand in terms of urbanization, that is emerging cities. So, the focus is no more on just the metros or the larger cities. The emerging cities, that is about 120 cities, are growing to such an extent that they have become an indicator of the average household. There are also rising income, that is a factor that is being increasingly considered by marketers. And there is a classic S-curve growth pattern that happens, but it does not always hold true in today's day and age. We also talk in terms of consumption income relationship categories. Now, these are consumers which take off at a certain income level, or they are literally linear with their income, that is they stay within the income, or consume a little less than the income, or they stop consumption after a certain threshold is reached, or stop consumption below a certain threshold. The spend, if we see, 12% is being spent on just footwear and clothing and apparel. So, you can imagine the kind of spend from a consumer's point of view on various products or consumables for their own personal consumption. We also talk in terms of organizational consumers. Now, these are consumers, they are people who are in charge of purchase for a business. Now, when we talk of organizational consumers, we need to understand that there are different factors that need to be considered. One, they may be making purchases for their own consumption, that is within the company's usage, or it could be as raw materials for further processing, or it could also be for resale. Like for example, we see Amazon. Amazon not only produces today, markets its own products, like for example, it has products like Solimo across the entire retail sector, but it also is an aggregator and it sells products of multiple other companies within its own website or portal. So, organization can be considered in terms of also the various types. For example, we have resellers. We were just talking in terms of Amazon or Flipkart. They are primarily resellers. They sell maybe certain brands of their own, but they are primarily making a large chunk of their money from selling other companies' products. Or manufacturers who will use these materials as raw materials for further processing and for their production usage, so that they can sell to a final end user. For example, automobile parts. A company may be buying automobile parts and using that to within the product, so they can manufacture cars and sell it to end users. Government is a big example, and another type of organization that is very important to consider is institutions like educational institutions. Ambedkar University is a great example of it. So, here it could be both private universities or state owned universities or semi private universities as well. And how does the purchase process happen for organizational markets? There is usually a committee that is constituted within the purchase department. They consider factors like whether to buy, what quantity, how much, when, from which vendor and things like that. However, the original intent is set by, say, an engineer within the firm. So, that is important to understand. And who gives the approval? Usually it is the finance department and the manager which will send the which will sign on the dotted line. So, in terms of the market potential, we also see that there is a huge potential within the country, and we have also talked in terms of the market size, the growth rate, the profitability, the competition, the product and consumer type. So, all these factors grow over a period in time. However, they also are important constituents of a business and its potential to introduce their products and grow their products within the country or outside the country. So, with this we will come to the end of today's session, and thank you, and we will further catch up in the next session. Have a good day. Thank you.